BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. Welcome to the home of True Crime Talk Radio and your premier destination for unsolved mysteries, criminal psychology, and exploring the dark side of cyberspace. My name is Ned DeHaan, and let the show begin. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Wednesday, another Ripper Wednesday. Welcome to the show. And to the close followers of Black Box Online Radio, they will have noticed that there was a brief hiatus with the episodes and the regularly scheduled lineup, but I'm hoping that they will all be coming out regularly from now on. As some of you know, I have relocated from the United States of America to the Philippines, so that was the reason for the hiatus that we've just experienced. And to those of you who follow some other true crime cases outside of the Ripper mystery, there are going to be some new events on Black Box Online Radio, more live streams. To those of you who follow the Zodiac Killer episodes that come out every Monday, there are going to be guests that will be featured on the program. So a lot of things to look out for. And if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions, you can hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNed88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. Now, Jack the Ripper was a serial killer who operated in 1888, and whatever happened before or after that is somewhat of a mystery. Some people believe that the Ripper relocated to a different country and continued to commit murders. Other people believe that the Ripper crimes actually began in the 1870s or the 1860s. In an unsolved case like this one, there is an enormous room for speculation as well as theorizing. But with the conventional narrative, there was a crime spree that took place in the summer and fall of 1888 in England, beginning on August 31st with the murder of Polly Nichols, and concluding on November 9th with the murder of Mary Kelly. And I've talked about a lot of different suspects here on these Jack the Ripper reports, as well as the individual suspect profile episodes, which I have a playlist for here on this channel. But one suspect that I've never discussed as of yet until now is Willie Clarkson, William Clarkson, and he is the subject of the documentary The Wigmaker of Wellington Street. Willie the Wigmaker of Wellington Street. Firstly, I love the wordplay, but was this guy actually Jack the Ripper? This is a documentary that is available on YouTube that you can watch for free, and it's about 30 minutes long, and I noticed with this one that immediately they jumped out of the get-go by saying most people accept that Jack the Ripper was a sociopath who murdered women, and it is an established fact that the canonical victims in the Ripper story were women, but that Jack the Ripper was a sociopath, I don't know if most people have accepted that, because it really depends on who your suspect is. And, for example, if your suspect is somebody like Jacob Levy, a butcher who lived in the vicinity of some of the crimes, the explanation would be that he had neurosyphilis, and he contracted syphilis from a prostitute, and he was very upset about that, and then he started going after other prostitutes, and then would experience these schizophrenia-like symptoms because of the neurosyphilis, and would have fits of mania, and would more or less go berserk on the women who would become the Ripper victims. And the theorist Pat Brown has concocted a theory that Jacob Levy murdered the first 4 victims, and meaning Polly Nichols and Annie Chapman, Liz Stride, and Catherine Eddowes, but did not murder Mary Kelly, because she thinks that was actually a Ripper copycat. Okay, but that would be an example of somebody who might be sociopathic, but also might be completely losing his mind when he's actually committing the ripping. And then you have other suspects out there, such as Sir William Gull. If your suspect is Sir William Gull, everything is a completely calculated conspiracy, where it was done for a very specific reason. The women were targeted, and it isn't even so much that the perpetrator would have been a sociopath as that he could have been doing this on behalf of the royal family, and these women were murdered to be silenced so they wouldn't share information. So I really don't think that it is widely accepted that the Ripper was a sociopath at all, because it's an unsolved case and there's so many possibilities. And to the credit of the documentary, The Wigmaker of Wellington Street, that's going to look at Willie Clarkson as a Jack the Ripper suspect, very early on, they gave that concession as well, and they pointed out that, now wait a second, these women could have been murdered because of a specific reason, and it actually ties into the theory involving Willie Clarkson. As previously stated, he was a wig maker, but also somebody who made costumes. There's even a plaque honoring him in London. And he seems like somebody who was very accomplished outside of being a Jack the Ripper suspect, and he would have been rather well known. I was even just on his Wikipedia, and I read something about him that he made dummies for the trenches in World War I, like dummies meaning that they were supposed to look like fake soldiers, so maybe the enemy would shoot a decoy or something to that effect. And I have to jump in to a different subject, and that is that there's this somewhat widely held belief that the Ripper was Jewish. And when you look at a suspect like William Clarkson, a wig maker, a costume maker, somebody who makes what? Disguises. How on earth could we possibly say that people in Whitechapel in the dark of night are just catching a glimpse of this person known as the Ripper and able to determine whether or not he was Jewish? I mean, could they determine whether or not he was Bulgarian? Could they determine whether or not he was French? Could they determine whether or not he was Portuguese? Just simply by catching a quick glimpse of somebody, or even getting a reasonable look at somebody to determine with certainty that the person was Jewish. Because if you have a suspect who is a costume maker or a wig maker, then you would be dealing with someone who has the ability to what? Alter their appearance. And with William Clarkson, he is someone who has that exact component in his theory. This is definitely discussed in The Wigmaker of Wellington Street, because they're talking about how this would have been a guy who would have been able to commit the murder, then sneak around the corner, and then change his appearance completely, putting on a different wig, altering his appearance, and then that's how he got away with this. That's how he was able to become Jack the Ripper, because he was able to quickly disguise himself. And this brings up a very big question, and that would be why? Why would there be this motive for this wig maker and costume designer and this individual of that profession to go on to become Jack the Ripper? And there could be a couple different motives that were explored in the documentary. One of them is blackmail, that Willie Clarkson was heavily involved with several different blackmail schemes. And there also could have been people who had knowledge of his blackmail schemes. And then there were also people who could have had insider knowledge about him directly. He had a female fiancée for a while, but ultimately that relationship broke up, and he went on to wear her engagement ring, the engagement ring that he had given her. He wore that for mostly the rest of his life. Maybe not completely the rest of his life, but mostly the rest of his life, because it was reported that when he was dead, he did not have the engagement ring, so some people might think that he was robbed prior to his death. But other than that, it was reported that William Clarkson was a homosexual, and it's also possible that he was indeed Jewish. That was something that was shared in the documentary as well, but they presented it as a possibility. They don't seem to have documentation of either one of those things 100%. And a lot of people wouldn't have direct knowledge of someone's homosexuality, because not only was it very taboo at the time, it was also illegal for certain people to fraternize in homosexual ways, in certain ways. And that could absolutely destroy somebody's reputation. And this ties into another aspect of the theory, that maybe these certain women had knowledge of William Clarkson's homosexuality or his illegal dealings, and he was rising to prominence as somewhat of an accomplished designer, and then they tried to blackmail him, because there is this enormous blackmail ring that is going on in England at the time, and then he wanted those women specifically targeted because he wanted to silence them so they wouldn't share information. And I thought it was a very interesting presentation, a very interesting yet odd presentation, because the documentary started out by talking about how, oh yeah, well, it's accepted that Jack the Ripper is a sociopath, and then it goes into this whole calculated reason, because I think what they were trying to say is William Clarkson, in their theory, was a sociopath, and he also targeted the women for specific reasons. The women were not sexually assaulted because, again, in their theory, William Clarkson was a homosexual. He wanted to murder these women because of some type of vengeful rage, power tripping, and also maybe, just maybe, being ashamed of his homosexuality. So he is targeting women in a way where he is unable to form relationships with them and live a normal life, normally accepted life at the time, so he is going after women. And they didn't say that exactly. That is my attempt to piece together certain points. The parts of this documentary, The Wigmaker of Wellington Street, that I will challenge most harshly will be in relation to how they tried to connect William Clarkson to the victims. They had a strong point by saying that all of the Whitechapel murders occurred within 3 miles of his wig shop. I think that's a very good point. Geographic profiling, excellent. And they also pointed out that he grew up in the area, so he would have a very intense familiarity with the layout, with the streets, and as they said, able to sneak around the street corner and find the place to change into a disguise. Believe it or not, serial killers do this all the time. I mean, we even saw this from the story of Lynn Leger, who was a serial killer known as the Monster of the Miramichi in Canada. He was familiar with his local area, so he knows the holes and fences even, and when people are chasing him, he knows how to go through a particular hole in the fence that other people wouldn't know about. The Ripper could have done that very easily in Whitechapel, but I said that I had some critical things. And that relates to this idea of a blackmail scheme. And they asked all these questions to the audience in the documentary The Wigmaker of Wellington Street, saying, number one, well, did the Ripper know Martha Tabram? Did William Clarkson know Martha Tabram, one of the pre-Ripper victims? Did some type of exchange happen between William Clarkson and Martha Tabram? Was Martha Tabram blackmailing William Clarkson? Asking all of these questions, and I'm like, I don't know. You're the ones making the documentary. Now is your chance to tell me what you have uncovered. I mean, do you have any documentation at all that would suggest that Martha Tabram was an associate of William Clarkson as opposed to just asking the questions? And it goes on in the same way. And also the same way with all of the victims. It was just asking the question. Now, is it possible that other Ripper victims could have been involved in a type of blackmail scheme with William Clarkson? And in the presentation, they jumped ahead, actually, skipping over the murder of Polly Nichols, who was the first accepted victim, skipping over the murder of Annie Chapman, who was the second accepted victim, and going straight to the murder of Elizabeth Stride. Elizabeth Stride was the third victim, and she was not mutilated. And unlike the other previous victims who were more or less disemboweled. And then the fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes, would go on to be disemboweled as well. And they told the story of how Elizabeth Stride had once made up a story about how she had survived the sinking of a ship, and she was a victim, and she was more or less marooned or stranded in England. I shouldn't have said the word marooned. Stranded in England, lost everything, and she made up stories to gain people's sympathy, and they're tying that into the blackmail scheme. All right, I follow the train of thought, but again, where's the documentation that she actually had some type of interaction with William Clarkson, and he murdered her to have her silenced? And this ties purely into the timeline. Think about what I just said. Starting with the murder of Martha Tabram, and then discussing the murder of Liz Stride, Martha Tabram is not an accepted Ripper victim by everyone. I have my doubts. I think there's a very high chance that Martha Tabram was actually murdered by Jack the Ripper. She was someone who was murdered prior to Polly Nichols. However, it is not an established fact. I also have doubts. I mean, I have my suspicions and my doubts as far as whether or not Martha Tabram was murdered by Jack the Ripper. I think that you can build a case for and build a case against. I thought with my absolute first instinct, there's no way this woman was murdered by Jack the Ripper. She was stabbed 39 times, whereas the victims in the Ripper case, other than Liz Stride, were not only stabbed, but mutilated, strangled, and they were disemboweled. Catherine Eddowes and Annie Chapman had their intestines pulled out and thrown over their shoulder. Those types of details just aren't present in the murder of Martha Tabram. But then you begin to think about it a little bit more, and somebody is a serial killer who is growing in confidence while they're committing a crime spree, and then it kind of would make sense that the first victim wouldn't be mutilated as severely, and then the final victim, Mary Kelly, would be mutilated the most severely, as horrible it is to sound. But in terms of profiling, I think that there is a reasonable case that you can discuss for that. So I just have to always give pushback when someone is going to be trying to accept that Martha Tabram is 100% certifiable as a Ripper victim, and they're accepting it as an established fact and saying that, well, then Polly Nichols is the second, Annie Chapman is the third, and as they stated in their documentary, The Wigmaker of Wellington Street, that Liz Stride was the fourth victim of Jack the Ripper. And this all just goes to show that they have accepted certain things to be true, and perhaps indeed they are not 100% true in the minds of everyone. But I just didn't particularly like how anything that dealt with the interactions between the suspect and the victims was insinuation or a question or some type of twisted and contrived narrative where you just have to accept the initial premise. So the ultimate pre-conclusion is there is a lot of mental gymnastics going on with this Willie Clarkson theory, but a little bit of background information about him. He was born on March 31st of 1861, and that would have placed him at the age of 27 at the time of the Whitechapel murders. So that's very doable, and that is somewhat in line with the people who have the conventional opinion that the Ripper was late 20s or early 30s and a Caucasian male. All of that seems to tie into a suspect like Willie Clarkson. And one point that was also shared in the documentary, The Wigmaker of Wellington Street, was that he grew up playing with wigs, and it wasn't only growing up around the wigs, but also around doctors' equipment, medical books, and even surgical tools because of family members, and he would have been exposed to these things at an early age. And I do have to give credit to them for that, pointing out that maybe Jack the Ripper wasn't a medical doctor, but somebody who had this type of knowledge for a different reason. So overall, Willie Clarkson is not a terrible suspect. In fact, I think there's some very strong points in favor of him being Jack the Ripper. It's just, there is a very, very fine line in the sand that we have to draw between, was somebody Jack the Ripper, or the full package theory that somebody has created about these blackmail schemes. I think that that is just utterly ridiculous. Or, in a more polite way of putting it, it's not supported by the facts. But in terms of profiling, somebody like Willie Clarkson does check a lot of the boxes for me. But overall, what do you think about Willie Clarkson as a Jack the Ripper suspect? You can put your ideas in the comment section down below. Maybe some of your comments will be worked into a future episode of Black Box Online Radio. Now, there is a story that is loosely connected to the Ripper case, and I've talked about it before on this channel, and it is the case of Dr. Crippen, a man who allegedly murdered his wife and then went off with his mistress in disguise. And the reason why I started reading up on this one again was for two reasons. One of them is it was reported by none other than Willie Clarkson, the wig maker, that he provided a disguise to Dr. Crippen. And I don't really have any type of Xerox email, text message, or anything, or any type of info like that I can show you that Willie Clarkson actually said these words, but I trust the internet, and the internet says that he made a wig for Dr. Crippen, and I was being sarcastic if you couldn't tell. We can't always trust the internet, but it is a story that has been shared online that Willie Clarkson did claim that he provided the disguises for Dr. Crippen and his mistress when they were trying to leave England. Dr. Crippen, again, allegedly murdered his wife, and then he went off with his mistress, first going on to continental Europe, and then to the Americas. And the case of Dr. Crippen is actually one where it was the first case in criminal history where the wireless telegraph played an instrumental role in apprehending a fugitive. But the person who went after Dr. Crippen was the Inspector Walter Dew, and he was also an inspector on the Jack the Ripper case, but Dr. Crippen went on to become his crowning achievement in his entire life. He even wrote a memoir, or somewhat of an autobiography, called I Caught Crippen, and the book that has been written about him is called Walter Dew, the Man Who Caught Crippen. Very big moment in criminal history. And I had more or less accepted wholeheartedly that Dr. Crippen, Dr. Howley Crippen, was guilty of the murder of his wife, but somebody wrote into the channel saying, Nid, did you ever hear the reports that Dr. Crippen was innocent because of scientific testing that was done about 15 years ago? My honest answer was, no, I hadn't heard about that, so I couldn't ignore that, and I also wanted to know why it wasn't a more established fact that Dr. Crippen had been cleared because of some type of scientific testing. And if we go to an article from The Guardian that was put out in 2007, it's going to tell us exactly why, and I think I can add some clarity to the situation. It's called 100 Years On, DNA Casts Doubts on Crippen Case. Body found in coal cellar was not wife, tests show. Scientist calls for pardon of a doctor who was hanged in 1910. It is one of the most notorious cases in British legal history, the story of an apparently mild-mannered doctor who poisoned and dismembered his showgirl wife, then fled across the Atlantic with his young lover, only to be caught by a sharp-eyed captain who recognized him from the papers. Dr. Hawley Crippen was hanged in 1910 after an Old Bailey jury just took 27 minutes to find him guilty of murdering his wife Cora, who had vanished earlier that year. Nearly a century later, research appears to show evidence which sent Crippen to the gallows was mistaken. The human remains discovered under his London house could not be those of Cora. But wait for it, we are not done yet, absolutely not. Working from a sample that was kept at the museum at the Royal London Hospital Archives, a team of American forensic scientists compared mitochondrial DNA from the remains presented at trial with samples taken from Cora Crippen's surviving relatives. The results were conclusive, said Dr. David Foran, the head of forensic science program. The body that was buried under Dr. Crippen's house could not have been Cora Crippen. We're certain of that, he said. Police found the mutilated remains with no head or bones. With no head and no bones. That's quite a conundrum. Newspapers at the time described Crippen as one of the most dangerous and remarkable men to have lived in the century. But according to John Trestrail, the toxicologist who led new research, poisoners rarely inflict external damage on their victims. It is so unusual that a poisoner would dismember the victim because a poisoner attempts to get away with murder without leaving any trace. In my database of 1,100 poisoning cases, this is the only one which involves dismemberment. I absolutely agree with this. As somebody who just follows true crime programs, I even did an episode once on BlackBoxOnlineRadio back in 2019 when I was talking about different stories that I heard on forensic files about somebody trying to poison somebody, and dismembering the victim doesn't take place normally because what happens with poisoning cases is somebody, firstly, might want to stage the scene to make it look like it was a health issue. Secondarily, the person is trying to commit the crime without immediately drawing attention to themselves. They don't want to have direct physical contact with the body, and dismembering the body is all about physical contact. But the discrepancy prompted him to re-examine the Crippen case. Working with a genealogist, Beth Wills, he set about finding Mr. Crippen's surviving relatives. After 7 years, the team tracked down 3 distant relatives in California and Puerto Rico. The challenge was able to find viable DNA samples from those presented at the trial. At the archives at the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, researchers found the microscope slide which helped hang Crippen. In court, a pathologist, Bernard Spilsbury, identified it as an abdominal scar consistent with Cora's medical history. Mitochondrial DNA is passed down in the egg from the mother to the daughter and remains relatively unchanged through generations. But the DNA in the sample was different from the relatives known of Mrs. Crippen. We took a lot of precautions when doing this, said Dr. Foran. We just didn't stop. We went back and forth and tested it again and again. The evidence offers no suggestion of who may have been buried in the coal cellar at 39 Hilldrop Crescent, Holloway, North London, but according to Mr. Trestrail, Crippen is innocent of the crime for which he was hanged. 2 weeks before he was hanged, he wrote, "I am innocent and someday evidence will be found to prove it." When I read that, the hair stood up on my arm. I think that he was right. The team conceded that they may never discover what happened to Mrs. Crippen, but several intriguing clues emerged during the research. Cora sang on the British stage under the name Belle Elmore, and if you do read about the Dr. Crippen case, you'll almost hear Cora referred to as Belle Elmore even more frequently. 10 years after the trial, a singer with a similar name was registered as living with Cora's sister in New York. Records show that the same woman entered the U.S. through Ellis Island from Bermuda in 1910, shortly after Mrs. Crippen disappeared. Are Belle Rose, that's the singer, and Cora Crippen one and the same? Mr. Trestrail asked. We can't prove it, but that is another investigation. Mr. Trestrail believes that Crippen should have been given a posthumous pardon. Last night, J. Patrick Crippen, his closest living relative, said, "Those of us in the family who have ever taken time to explore the circumstances surrounding the trial and conviction and hanging of Dr. Crippen have never been more convinced that this was the finest example of a miscarriage of English justice." Hawley Crippen was an American doctor who moved to England in 1900 and with his wife Cora Turner. Cora disappeared in 1910, and and Crippen said she had returned to the United States, and then later that she died in California. After his lover, Ethel Leneve, moved into the couple's home in Holloway, London, Core's friend alerted the police, but a search revealed nothing, and Crippen and Leneve fled to Belgium before embarking on the SS Montrose to Canada. They were disguised as father and son, but the ship's captain became suspicious and alerted the police using the newly invented what? Wireless telegraph, and Crippen was convicted and hanged at Pentonville Prison. He protested his innocence until the end. So, I think that the overall conclusion of this article is that it's, as it says from the title, DNA is casting doubts. Now, again, we talk about mitochondrial DNA a lot here on Black Box Online Radio, and it seems that it is not the best at identifying people, and it also brings up the question about the abdominal scar that would have been present. And I mean, this is almost leading to more questions than answers. Number one, did she actually go to Bermuda and then to the United States? I mean, Dr. Crippen said she returned to America, but then this woman would have gone to Bermuda instead of America. I mean, that's not impossible, but is that exactly what happened? And secondarily, I mean, whose body was buried in the in the cellar where this was supposedly or allegedly Core's body? So I think that this shows us that there are doubts, but I am not 100% certain that there was that Dr. Crippen was innocent, and that is where I'm going to leave it at for now. And I'll keep reading up on this, and perhaps that I can do a follow-up episode in the future. But, I mean, this really does indeed cast a certain amount of doubts, and I do thank The Guardian for this article, and it's called 100 Years On, DNA Cast Doubt on Crippen Case, and there are numerous other articles that have been written about this, but overall it doesn't appear that there is a universal consensus that Dr. Crippen was indeed innocent, so it's time to do a little bit more exploration and a little bit more evaluation of the information. And with some other Jack the Ripper reports, I've often concluded the episode with a poem from Francis Thompson. Francis Thompson is a Jack the Ripper suspect, and he is the subject of the book Francis Thompson, The Works of Jack the Ripper. Why do I always butcher that title? Jack the Ripper, The Works of Francis Thompson, and it's written by Richard Patterson. In the past, I used to think that Francis Thompson was actually a very high-ranking Jack the Ripper suspect, but as time goes on, you can always find fault in anybody's theory, and then you begin to think about things with a different lens and a different filter, and it looks like, okay, maybe this guy has a few strikes against him that I didn't notice immediately. But one of the key pieces of evidence that Richard Patterson uses to build his case on Francis Thompson is the interpretations of his poetry. Now, it's not the only pieces of evidence. If you were to Google Richard Patterson, you might see that that's listed as the only thing on Francis Thompson's checklist of suspicious behavior, but Francis Thompson had a relationship with a prostitute that was failed. He had medical knowledge. He was a failed doctor. And so many things could point to his involvement in the Ripper case. But as of for now, I would just like to read one of his poems, because Francis Thompson was more famous for his poetry rather than being a Ripper suspect, much the same way that Willie Clarkson was more famous for being a wig maker and a designer than a Ripper suspect. But this poem is called Before Her Portrait in Youth, and I think that you guys might see a few Ripperological items if you can follow me. As lovers banished from their lady's face, and hopeless of her grace, fashion a ghostly sweetness in its place, fondly adore. Some stealth one cast attire she wore, a kerchief or a glove, and at lovers back into the glove there fleets the hand, or at impetuous command, up from the kerchief floats the virgin neck, so I, very in lowly head of love, too shyly reverencing, to let one's thought light footfall smooth, tread near the living consecrated thing, treasure me thy cast youth. This outworn vesture, tenantless of thee, hath yet my knee, for that with show and semblance fair of the past her. Who once the beautiful discarded remnant bare? It cheateth me. As gale to gale drifts the breath of blossom's death, so dropping down the years from hour to hour, this dead youth's scent is wafted me today. I sit from the fragrance and dream of the flower, so then she looked, I say, and so her front sank down, heavy beneath the poet's iron crown. On her mouth museful sweet, even as the twin lips meet, did thought and sadness greet. Sighs in those mournful eyes, so put on visibilities, as timeless ether turns in deep or deep to dyes. Thus long ago she kept her meditative paces slow, through maiden meads with waved shadow and gleam of locks half lifted on the winds of dream, till love caught her at the chariot's glow. Yet voluntary, happier, prosper, this drooping flower of youth thou lettest fell, I faring in the cockshut light astray, find on my lated way, and stoop down, and gather for memorial, and lay it on my bosom, and make it mine, to this the love of all the stars. Allow me, I dedicate and vow me, I reach back to the days, I troth hand to the dead, and the last trump shall not raise the water wraith that cries from those eternal sorrows of thy pictured eyes, and twines and draw me down their soundless intricacies. And this is called Before Her Portrait in Youth by Francis Thompson. This one I think is halfway in and halfway out in terms of morbid imagery. I mean, absolutely, absolutely. There is morbid imagery, but sometimes when I'm reading these poems of Francis Thompson, it sounds like, holy crap, this guy is just an absolute sadist. He seems like someone who's about to just break out into murderous rage. And then other times when I've read poems of Francis Thompson, it sounds like, okay, he's just some emotional guy who's all light and airy, and that's all it is. It's just a bunch of frilly emotions. This one's halfway in, halfway out. But what do you think about that? Definitely, definitely, this guy had issues with women. And, I mean, he's not even trying to hide that. And in poetry, yes, people talk about the issues that they're having with people whom they're romantically involved with. It's like that expression, you have to be sad to sing the blues, and people who get their heart broken often write songs that are very captivating, that people are able to connect with and bond with. And this will be something that I'm going to keep going with, but what did you think about that poem? Do you think that that sounds like Jack the Ripper, or does that just sound like a guy who has some issues being rejected by women? No right or wrong answer. Purely, what do you think about anything that you heard in that poem there? And that's going to be all for me now. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And I would like to know, what do you think about Willie Clarkson as a Jack the Ripper suspect? Question number 2, do you think that Dr. Crippen was innocent? And number 3, what do you think about the Francis Thompson poem? Put your ideas in the comment section down below. Also, feel free to tune in every Monday for Zodiac Monday. Also, for some of the new episodes that are going to be coming out daily here on Black Box Online Radio. Shorts will be released every day, actually, 7 days a week, and then of course it's going to be the 5 day a week lineup for the long form content. Please put your ideas in the comment section down below about something that you would like to hear for the Anything Goes Friday segment. Any subject is fair game. And I am also hoping that I'm going to look at some of the Jack the Ripper suspects in a different lens, and incorporating their stories into the Anything Goes Friday segment, where not necessarily only focusing on the Ripper case, but a lot of the Jack the Ripper suspects get accused of an enormous amount of crimes. Well, let's examine them, and I'll put them into the Anything Goes Friday segment. But I would love to read your messages in the comment section down below. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com, and that is a very good place when you want to send long form responses, or sometimes people have something that they don't want to share publicly. Maybe it's certain personal things, or they have an observation about a true crime case for a personal reason. You can always write me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio at AOL.com, and you can get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is on Instagram. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and of course, Instagram, BlackBoxNed88. Another jumbled sentence. What a way to end the show. But in all seriousness, I release the reels on Facebook and Instagram. The YouTube shorts come out in 3 different places. So feel free to tune in to the reels on Facebook, and you can also get them on Instagram, BlackBoxNet88, Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter, on X now. We have to call it X, right? Because Twitter is going to be changing its name. That's going to be so weird. All right, well, I'm going to sign off before I mangle any more words in the English language, and until next time.